Here we go. Oh, there's Shannon. So let's do a go around. I'm Amy. I'm in Santa Cruz, California, and I'm a 3 principles practitioner of many years now, maybe 25 plus years. And I'm also a climate activist with Extinction Rebellion. Been working with the International Regen Group a little bit, as well as the National Strategy Team. But you don't have to be in Extinction Rebellion to be here. You could be doing anything at all. So, or not doing anything, as the case may be. So let's do a quick go around, starting with Kimberly. Do you want to start? And we'll just
Okay, yeah. Hi, Amy. Hello, everybody. Kimberly here. I'm a writer, a blogger. I facilitate retreats and workshops, and I do one-to-one support with people, and specifically at the moment around climate grief or eco-anxiety, and I'm also heavily involved in the positive deep adaptation community. Great to be here.
Who'd like to go next? Shannon, how about you?
This is kind of yes.
We can't quite hear you very well. Are you?
It's because I'm just a bit sick, so
okay.
I'll pass.
Okay, sounds good. And Larry, is that you? Are you there from Mississippi? You must be, are you on the phone? I don't know if you can unmute. Can you hear me, Larry? Okay, I can't hear Larry. So let's go. Anyone else? Allison, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, we can't hear those guys. How about Helena?
Hi there.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. We're just introducing ourselves with a little bit of background. As much as,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm Helena. I'm in Bristol in the UK. I've joined, I think I've done about 2 or 3 of these Zoom meetings. I'm part of Extinction Rebellion, and I've just sort of been getting involved with some of the deep adaptation stuff recently as well. Yeah.
Cool. And I see Allison raised her hand. So Allison, yeah, go ahead. If you, we just weren't able to hear you before. Are you there? Oh, we can't hear you. Maybe, are you, let me check the chat box. All right. So Allison, we can't hear you, but if you have, I don't know if you have access to the chat box, but you could introduce yourself there. And then we have, who else would like to go? Donald or Andre? What do you say?
Okay, I'll go. So, hello everyone. I'm Andre Clements. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I used to be, in this order, somebody's daddy, somebody's lover, partner, husband, and then a programmer slash photographer slash artist, which led me to really observe the state of the world and got me to a point where I packed up my studio and joined Extinction Rebellion, where I'm involved locally as well as in the international support team Regen Circle, but still don't see myself as an activist. And also increasingly drawn to the deep adaptation side, and specifically the overlap between the deep adaptation agenda and Extinction Rebellion, quite apart from all my own processes and things that I'm going through. And yeah, that's kind of my story, and I'll stick to it for now.
Thank you, Andre. Let's see, how about Donald?
Hi, my name is Donald Zepeda. I'm in Seattle, Washington at the moment. What was the last thing we need to answer? I missed the beginning, I'm sorry.
Oh, just, you know, what you're into while you're here. It can be as brief as you like or a little bit longer.
Okay. Well, I'm on the key base for Extinction Rebellion US. I do work with regenerative culture in XR Seattle, and so I'm also in the regenerative culture channel in US XR, and there's I think somebody promoted this, so I figured I should check it out.
Okay. Welcome. It was probably me that promoted it because I'm on Keybase too. Yeah. Yeah. Welcome.
Okay.
Glad you joined us. Awesome. Who else has not gone who can actually speak?
Yeah, I can go, Amy.
Okay, Tim.
So, yeah, hi, I'm Tim. I'm based in the UK, a little bit north of Bristol, over by the Welsh border in Herefordshire. I've been listening to a few of these, been live on a few of them, like what the conversation's about. I'm a coach, trainer. I help people in psychological suffering, and I'm deeply passionate about young people and the next generation. So, been on the fringes of XR and some of the subjects and campaigns. However, really locally based work that I'm involved with at the moment here in Herefordshire in the West Midlands. So yeah, good to be here. Amazing how many people from around the world, all corners. Brilliant.
Yeah. And Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm in Totnes in Devon in the southwest of the UK. I'm involved in XR, Transition Town movement, deep adaptation, and also been a coach facilitator of the 3 principles for about 9 or 10 years.
Great. I see your posts a lot, and I just love them on Facebook and so forth. Let's see. We also have Vera, who's in Findhorn. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Vera. I'm based in north of Scotland, Findhorn, in an eco community, big eco community. I've been part of most of these conversations, and I find them really touching, heartening. And what am I? I'm a potter. I'm kind of doing my first toddler steps as a coach. Creative person. That's it for now. And my internet is wobbling, so it keeps coming up that it's unstable, so I might switch camera off or something, but I'm here.
Okay, cool. If anything happens, yeah, for some reason my internet goes out, I'll get back on the same link, so we can, you can just wait for me, or if you get thrown off. Let's see. So Dion, is it Dion? I'm unmuting you.
Hi, hello, it's Dion. Like Dion, like Dion Warwick. So I'm in Gauteng, Johannesburg, and I'm the coordinator for the arts circle, regenerative culture, and the community. And there, obviously, with art, there's always an overlap into those things. So even in our mandate, we've written those kind of things as well. It also is for regenerative culture and building with communities as part of my mandate in the art. We've put that into our art circle mandate, and I've also worked a lot. It's always, those kind of skills lend themselves straight away to active art. And I also do a lot of biodanza. And I'm planning to study that this year specifically because I feel that dance has got a part to play in reconnecting. Thanks.
Thanks, Dion. It's you've broken up a little bit, but I think we got kind of the gist of things. If you want to add in the chat box, that would be fun. And I think we've got everybody now, and we're just about 10 minutes past, so that's good. What's occurring to me is we have new people on from XR, and we have people who've been involved in the Three Principles world for some time. And what's occurring to me is to just talk about the principles as a paradigm in looking at mental health, well-being, regenerative culture, even activism, and then seeing where the conversation goes from there. I originally thought because it was holidays, it would just be a small group of Three Principles practitioners, but we've got a bunch of new folks on. So let me just start by introducing the principles and then seeing what questions arise, because I think questions will arise, and how does this apply, and etc. And we have people who've been teaching for some time, and I'm happy for folks to chime in. I thought Chantal would be on today, but perhaps she's on holiday. She's in England. So the Three Principles are a spiritual psychology that boils down to just these three very simple principles that seem to be able to go very well into all kinds of communities, all kinds of organizations and institutions, really anywhere, because they are sort of universal. And people who are in different religions, people who are in different spiritual practices tend to recognize sort of a core truth in these principles that they then relate back to either their religion or their spiritual practice. And in some cases, atheists will just relate to these principles in a way that's about a natural intelligence versus maybe a godlike intelligence, but that there's a natural intelligence in life that we either are kind of in the flow with or not. And so Sydney Banks introduced the Three Principles. He was a 9th grade educated Scottish welder who moved from Edinburgh to British Columbia and had an insight when he was working as a welder, I think, on Vancouver Island. And he would spend the rest of his life sharing this insight, which some of you will think, oh, I've heard that before. That's like everything else I've heard before, or a lot of things I've heard before. But there's a depth to the simplicity of them that helps people get past a lot of the form and the ritual and the sort of external processes that are really helpful, but sometimes lock us into a way of thinking about truth or thinking about mental health or spiritual grounding as being attached to certain forms. And what I've noticed is that the principles help people get past the attachment to a form around those truths or concepts. So in a nutshell, and I'm going to do my best here, we would sometimes take 2.5 days to do a workshop on the principles. The principles are mind, consciousness, and thought. And so mind with a capital M is like the Buddhist mind, big mind. Or sometimes Buddhists will say no mind, meaning the personal mind has quieted and there's only this what we would call universal mind with a capital M. There's a mind that is the source of intelligence for all life, really. I think Sid defined it as the energy and intelligence of all life, whether in the form or formless. And then the second principle, there's no real order, is consciousness. And consciousness is our capacity to experience life via our senses. So it's just what the very simplest definition of you're born, like a switch is pulled, and you're conscious of life. You have tasting, touching, seeing, smelling, etc. You have the experience of life through the senses. Another word is awareness. And the third principle is thought. And thought is the capacity we have as human beings to create our moment-to-moment subjective reality. So we have this gift of thought that we use to create, let's say, thought forms, many of which we've inherited from our culture, inherited from our families, inherited from our personal life experiences, to the point where we're not even sure sometimes whether we're actually in reality or we're in our subjective thinking or our conditioning about life or about a situation. It's hard to tell. So we're just often projecting what's real rather than actually intuiting what's really right in front of us in the moment. So, you know, that's the difference between being present, being mindful, being open, being, let's say, aware, versus being reactive, being caught up, being stuck, and sort of looping around in conditioning and past thoughts. So all of this then sort of comes down into what I see as like a sense of the individual as a concept. You know, our self-concept is also thought created, and it comes and goes. So when we are reacting to something, we are often coming, and in most cases, if not all cases, coming from an idea of a self, which some have called the separate self or the sense of separation, that we need to protect or to enhance or to something. And we can get very defensive about this self, to the point where even if there's not a physical threat to our body, we feel as if there is when someone's just attacking our self-concept, or when we think someone's attacking our self-concept. We can have a huge reaction based on, you know, this sort of programming about a separate self. So all practitioners in the three principles are at different levels of understanding with this, or looking at this and describing it. Like some people really have a great depth, and other people are, you know, about the idea of a separate self, and other people are mostly going into, say, corporate or going into nonprofit organizations and working with just suffering, human suffering and conflict and ego and that kind of thing. So now this has become a movement across the world, and with a lot of energy. You know, it's interesting what's happening in the UK: Extinction Rebellion, Deep Adaptation, Transition Town, all these amazing movements. And the three principles has really picked up steam there. And we now have many, many authors and practitioners in England writing books, and actually across Europe, including Jamie Smart, who used to do NLP. And I forget the name. Oh, Jamie wrote a book called Clarity. Also Chantal Burns, who normally is with us, who wrote Instant Motivation. So, and then there are people in the US who've written. A lot of the original students of Sydney Banks live in the United States and Canada, and they've written quite a few books. And this work has gone into inner city communities, it's gone into jails and prisons, it's gone into social services of all kinds. And it's sort of been my hope that the insights that people can get from looking at the principles can help activists too, and people who are working on the climate crisis. And one of the most helpful things is to help people distinguish between their reactions, which we all have a lot of right now around the crisis, with fear and future projections and all kinds of things, all kinds of frightening, thoughts and scenarios are happening, not just for activists, but for young people as well. And, who are looking at a very uncertain future. And so the principles help people see that they're projecting in the moment. And it's not that we shouldn't understand reality and what's happening and act, but that we ourselves can stay, it's possible to stay in a state of sort of peace or authentic response based on our own, what we call wisdom, that we have that energy of mind that happens when our minds are clear, that we can be actually present and grounded. And what this opens up for us is a capacity to move beyond conflict, to see another person's thoughts and perspectives, because we're getting out of our own box of thoughts, and we're able to see a bigger picture and how other people are responding based on their own fears and conditioning. So I can see this as being tremendously helpful for everyone, not just Extinction Rebellion people. I've also been introducing it with Kim to Positive Deep Adaptation and Jem Bendel. And I feel like I've been talking for some time, and I know there may be questions. And I'm just wondering what, I'll just share one last, thought that I've had, is that I can go, as a human being, go into a lot of thoughts, and as a mother, about the current crisis. And it can upset me, and I can be upset about it, and I can be depressed about it, and I can be anxious. And there are other times when I can be so present that it almost feels like nothing matters, that nothing around me matters except for this moment in time. And it seems counterintuitive, but that space of being present brings a depth of, I'm not sure how to put it, beingness, let's say, that informs the actions that happen in, as we move along. And so, and also creates a kind of a magnetism for people, which I'm seeing is needed so much now. People who actually can be grounded in the midst of what's happening, and in the midst of a lot of activism, for some of us, to be able to stay grounded and not get too frantically busy and, all that kind of thing, which, I honestly go in and out of. So any thoughts on all of that? I'm going to be quiet now and see if anyone wants to add to that from a principles perspective, or if there are questions from people who are like brand new to all of this. Yeah, Kimberly.
Yeah, I was just really to build on your fabulous introduction there. I lead an organisation called the Heart of Thriving, and I've been giving lots of talks recently to XR groups and other groups called, well, it's a question really, but I believe the answer is yes. Is it possible to truly thrive even in the midst of this ecological and climate crisis? And I believe it is. And for me, it's about seeing that we all have this innate capacity for well-being, for wisdom, for clarity, for mental health, for creativity as well. And it's built into the system. And the only thing that ever takes us away from that, because it doesn't actually go anywhere, but it can feel like it goes somewhere, is, again, thought in the moment, or as I like to say, thought believed. Thought that doesn't look like thought, it looks like reality, it looks like truth. And that I think what people find really they resonate with, and it feels like a coming home, is that at the level of our true nature, so underneath our personal psychology, our individual thinking, we're all deeply connected with the whole of life, and are made of love, so we're not separate at all. And I think that's the real hope of this understanding, so that people can cut through all of that noise that's going on in their head, and see the way forward, whatever that is for them. So just wanted to add that.
The other piece that I've been working on is not just bringing the principles into my, my activism and activism in general, but also bringing the climate crisis to the principles people. So there's I think some of you have probably experienced spiritual people who are sort of not wanting to put their heads up out of the sand or up out of the water to even look around at what's happening, because there's a sense that might, I'm not even sure what it is, but maybe a sense that might disturb them too much, or it's all an illusion, or that kind of spiritual, people call it spiritual bypass sometimes, when there's fear there and they don't want to have to deal with it or confront it. And so actually the principles can help with that, in the sense of helping people stay grounded around the facts. But I also feel like bringing spiritual people or people who are doing mindfulness into this movement will help us so much, because there's so much, there's so much we're dealing with, right? So so I'm also speaking in that direction as well, and hoping to get some of my colleagues, and they have been actually getting on board. Kimberly was a pioneer, actually, and not because of me, because of almost at the same time we were like, oh, the climate crisis. What are we going to do about that? So yeah, so any other thoughts, and especially people who maybe have been in a little of both of the worlds, and how this has maybe impacted them or helped them, or I'm thinking.
Can I ask a question in relation to the three principles? Sometimes when I'm sort of thinking about the climate crisis and experiencing emotions in relation to that, I'm not always sure how to differentiate between looking at the facts and trying to really be in alignment with the truth and really be really honest and about what's happening, and then where that kind of switches over maybe into me merging into my own stuff, which is then unhealthy. And because it feels appropriate when looking at the truth to have some kind of emotional response of grief or anger, upset. So yeah, sometimes I'm not sure when that's a healthy response, or when I'm just going into something which is maybe more thought-based in a way that it's unhealthy. And I don't know if there's any sort of guidance from three principles that might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to take a shot, and I think Kimberly may have something to add, maybe Erica, maybe Shannon, maybe Larry, but we can't hear you, Larry. There's this piece about grief that Joanna Macy has introduced to the environmental world, and for me, what that represents is that most people who actually look at the facts of things will experience a range of emotions, including grief, like anxiety. I'm going to mute people. Okay. And the idea of allowing the grief is a huge step forward, from the perspective of the grief is there, and we're over covering it with thoughts about how we're afraid of feeling that grief. So there's the thoughts about what's happening, That's creating the grief. I call it a layer cake. The thoughts about what's happening, a lot of it's future projection, actually. So it's as yet unreal, and some of it's real, things that we're losing that we see, or people suffering now. And then we have thoughts about that's too much, and I'm going to shut down somehow, or I'm going to distract or avoid. So those thoughts are like, I can't handle this. I can't handle this feeling. And so what's, I think, beautiful about what Joanna Macy talks about and other people in terms of grief work, and in fact, Linda Pettit will be speaking to grief on our next call next month. She's a psychologist. She's written about grief. She's a beautiful, beautiful soul. So the first, just taking off that first layer of I can't feel this, I can't bear it, is the relief, because you take off that layer of I can't bear it, I can't feel this, it's too much, and you go just into the feeling. And going just into the feeling actually is a way of being present. That's how I see it, because what's happening is the emotion is there and you're just allowing it because it's already there. It's in the present, it's with you, it's in the body, you allow it. Now that doesn't mean repeating the thoughts or continuing the narrative that's creating the grief. Like the sea stars in my bay have disappeared, and the kelp beds are going, and I can keep thinking about that, and I'll keep creating grief. But really just being with grief, the feeling, is about dropping into the feeling without the thoughts. Like yesterday, I was not in a good space at all, and left the house, left my whole family. I was upset at everybody, and I went out and I went walking on the beach, and I was just crying. And that felt better than trying to struggle with explaining myself, or doing anything else but just crying and being in that feeling, and there's a simplicity. You see how the thoughts start to kind of dissolve, and you're just in the simplicity of a feeling, which is getting you closer to your presence, or your, what people call your true nature, which is what's underneath all of that. So I was able to sort of just be. I go to a church here that's kind of similar to a Three Principles philosophy church, and I have a little garden plot, and I went and worked on that for a while, and just being in that feeling of sadness. But when
Could I ask?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to add. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll try and get it in quick. I think part of it is the fact that a lot of it is a future fantasy. It's the grief about, obviously a lot of it is present as well right now, but a lot of the grief is about something that hasn't already happened, and in order to connect with that and to process it kind of takes a thought process of having to almost like consciously think about it to connect with the feelings. And I'm doing that to try and process, because I want to be in contact with the truth and process it, but I'm also having to think about something that isn't actually necessarily true. It's my imagination of how things are going to be, and so yeah, it's kind of a weird one, because it's sort of grieving something that hasn't, to some extent, I guess, happened.
And we would say, actually, that's not necessary. It's, well, I would say, speaking for myself, it's not necessary to, this is difficult because we're grieving something that hasn't happened. Things have happened. Some of them feel very distant from us, in the global north, or in, wherever we are, very privileged places. But you have to look at what that's doing for you or not. Like if it's helping you to maybe wake up and be active, fabulous. But if it's just creating anxiety and depression, our stance would be, there's a better place to be active. Like you don't need to keep In fact, that's what I'm seeing people do, and I see it in myself, and I'm starting to see how unhelpful it is to keep projecting. This is how do we even deal with a grief that is mourning things that haven't happened yet? Like that will be a continual grief in a way, like it will be never ending. And I see a danger there. And that's why Macy, I think, talks about going into gratitude for what is, because there still is a lot of beauty. And, sometimes I think about humanity, and people are very upset about humanity right now, what we've done, but at the same time, there's a lot of beauty and creativity and amazingness, So it's from the state of gratitude that we become present. And it's from that, if we can hold that space, I think as activists or as people acting in the world, whatever we're doing, then people will be drawn to that feeling, because we cannot go into, the mental health crisis that's possible now and that's starting to happen, I think, for young people is so overwhelming. That this kind of understanding about being in the now, being present, it's so essential in my mind.
I'm sorry, I'm probably talking too much, but this is just, I think some of it is having read The Deep Adaptation, and I'm wondering how you begin to process something like that when it's kind of a shock at first to read it, when you're kind of being told something about the future. I just have felt a bit kind of disorientated by it and not quite knowing how to process that, because I want to be in contact with the truth and really sort of take that in, the whole of it. But yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense. But in light of not grieving something that hasn't already happened, I don't know how you begin to sort of process something like that, something that's...
Well, we would say you don't have to process it actively. No, that's a term in psychotherapeutic circles that we tend to, what does it mean to process something, to think about it over and over? And I think, Helena, you're pretty clear about what's happening. And I would say just give yourself permission to not think about it over and over. It's not necessary. Once you understand basic facts, you don't have to chew on it again and again. But actually coming into the present it's not processing, it's actually letting go of all those thoughts, which can feel irresponsible, but is actually really essential. And it can feel counterintuitive now, but I would assert that it's essential to let go. And Andre has his hand up.
I was originally, when Elena mentioned it, like some thoughts came to mind, which at that point I didn't want to share because it felt very ambiguous, amorphous. But it's kept coming up for me, so I'm going to go there, and apologies if it is not very well articulated. And I want to use it as a segue into asking how the three principles relates to this. What I'm increasingly imagining or experiencing is that the climate crisis, the possibility of extinction, however you look at it, on some level is presenting humanity with a rite of passage. It is like a rite of initiation. And on some level, for the first time, we are confronted on a level like we've never been before with our fixation and subservience to and addiction to cultural fictions of immortality. The reality is we were all always going to die eventually. It'll be a hell of a pity if we take the only known instance of life and the known universe out along with ourselves. But the mere fact that we feel about that the way that we do also seems to imply an illusion or maybe a delusion about the immortality of everything and everyone around us as well. In terms of getting caught in the thoughts and processing is such a metaphor that comes out of the industrial machine age that has led us into this problem in itself. So there's a whole angle one could explore there and look at alternatives to processing. But the issue that emerges for me is that this is almost forcing or challenging us to consciously enter into a relationship with what all of that means, with our own demise, with our own fallibility, our own mortality, and that of the world around us. And once you do that, you can enter into a relationship that's something that's organic and growing. And just like you get to know a person or another being, another animal, you can start relating to and having a conscious relationship with your mortality. And we can share that in a way that we've never been able to do as a species before. And that, I think, is an exquisite gift in all of this. So in terms of that stepping into relationship with truth, how do the three principles fit in around that, would be my question.
Well, that's a very Buddhist view, isn't it? The impermanence of life and all things. But you're also bringing in this word mortality, which can seem a bit like, oh, oneself, is also impermanent. This self-concept, this whole body, etc. And yeah, it actually fits in quite perfectly, because when we can understand that all form passes, thought forms, body forms, planetary forms, perhaps, social systems, economies, everything will change and dissolve and disappear. This planet will probably, eventually the sun will expand and eat up this planet too, right? That's the other thing that's going to happen. So when you can really accept that, because there's a fear around that. So acceptance is about getting past the fear, just accepting that it's okay. That's huge. That's a huge insight and point of growth, and from a spiritual perspective. And then you can act without attachment, because you're not in the grips of this fear. You can act because your preference would be to see us respond in a sometimes I just see myself as an activist, because I'm like, well, are we going to just go down like assholes? Like we're just not going to even have no peep from society. Are you kidding me? Let's just make a fuss, whether it works or doesn't work. Like, how ridiculous. That's just me, my personality. So, but to have a sense that it also could all just head in the direction it appears to be heading, and still act, is very powerful, because you're coming from a place of both acceptance and like a grounded activist energy. Or activist, by activist I mean you're just acting like you are, Andre, in participating in webinars with Extinction Rebellion and doing your bit. It's just doing your bit. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm possibly not familiar enough with the three principles in the context of the whole kind of body of knowledge around it.
Yeah.
To kind of make the mental connections, because I do tend to process things more cerebrally than emotionally, for example, just where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
So that's where I try to find the connections to anchor things onto.
Right. So from a logical thought perspective, thoughts of this cannot happen are fear-based, and thoughts of it's okay if this happens because this is what happens are not fear-based. And the two different energies are quite different, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was the piece I actually didn't talk about, is that every thought has a feeling to it. It's like we talk about tea bags, put a tea bag in hot water. It's like putting a thought in your mind. And the thought of loss will create a sadness or a fear, and the thought of bounty and abundance, wherever we are, in whatever situation, will create a feeling of gratitude and, possible joy. And that's how simple these principles are, where people think it's ridiculous how simple they are, like it's really just moment to moment, a fearful thought or a present, or a loving thought, a compassionate thought or a selfish thought. That's it. We're just moving through time and space with different kinds of thoughts. And you're speaking to.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead. Who's?
So that was Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just considering what Helena spoke to about the emotional side of it, and Andre building on that with the logical side of it. And for me, in my experience of the principles, when we talk about thoughts, we're not just talking about thinking. We're talking about that intelligence that is coming through, that you spoke about, Amy. That intelligence that comes through us, that we're born into. That is innate. And recently I've moved away from pointing to these thoughts cause these feelings, and I realised a little bit more, for me, my own personal experience, that feelings or emotions, if you like, one and the same thing, if you want to, are just like the shadow of thought or thinking, personal thinking, greater thinking. And I don't know whether it's useful, or certainly for me, Andre, I was, when I first came across the principles 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time working it out and working out, what it was, and likening it to, and comparing it to a lot of things that I'd come across in theory a lot of the time. And like you, Helena, I was thinking, how do I process this? And actually, as time moved on, a lot of that thinking just dropped away from me, because in understanding what I think I understand about the principles, it was almost subtractive. It took a lot off my mind, and starting to delete, or started to make some of so when I'm in a good state, so I think when we're born in a state as a baby, you're born of joy, gratitude, love, well-being, all of that stuff is just there. And then when our thinking goes in a direction, as we grow older and things seem to get more complex, that produces a lot of our unnecessary thinking or unnecessary emotions, which we buy into. I like Kimberly's phrase, paraphrasing now because I can't remember what the exact words was, but it's belief, thought believed. So for me, that's me buying into what I believe is causing my experience. But nowadays, I can distinguish, most of the time, not all the time, because I'm human, right? It's just part of the human existence. And nowadays, I can see where I'm just living in the natural me, the spiritual me, if you like, the innate wisdom or truth that other free principles practitioners might talk about. Don't know, those words are fraught with complexity for me. But I can see when I'm living in that, because actually it doesn't occur to me to have to process something or to do something about my thoughts, or I'm just being, you know. So even when you talk about gratitudes, Amy, I would contradict that and say that's being grateful for things is a great thing to do, and there is a lot to be grateful for in life. And the more we do that, the more that we get, we feel grateful, or we create that for ourselves in any moment. But it's still just a thinking, creating that feeling or emotion in the moment 100% of the time. So I don't know whether that makes sense to anybody else, but for me, what I'm saying here is, with a deeper understanding of the principles, I can just catch myself when I'm getting upset about X, Y, and Z, or believing X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't occur to me to do anything other than just be when I'm not doing that. So I can spot it more often. I can spot when I'm getting taking exception to somebody's beliefs or opinions. And then when I catch myself doing that, it falls away. It seems to me that would be very useful. And I know that XR talk a lot about that when you're talking to climate deniers or people who are not facing some of the seemingly facts about what's happening in planet Earth. So yeah, I just wanted to say about the thought feeling connection and that shadow. I don't think it's very useful to see them as separate things. For me, it's part of the principle of thought taking form in our experience as human beings from moment to moment. So I just wanted to say that because it was in my head.
And Dion has a question. You had your hand up, Dion. Is it still up?
It went up and down a few times. You know what
Dion, you know what your sound is?
There were so many things that I was thinking of saying in response to people, and then I kind of lost them, and then they came back. But the question is, can you hear me? You can't hear me. Huh?
It's difficult. It's either running too fast or it's garbled. Can you type into the chat box your question?
Okay, let me try.
Could I suggest we all just quickly mute our video, which might give Dion better signal throughput?
Oh, shame.
Okay. Try again.
Well, you can. Okay. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit.
It's a bit better.
Okay. What I found is the actual. What I wanted to ask was the actual tone of our actions. I mean, there was like a message that came through. Can't remember who wrote it, but was like from one of the founding members of XR saying how, you know, like kind of that upbeat and the fun part and the eccentric parts of XR, he was saying it's kind of like making us look silly and the problem's too serious now, you know, no more pink submarines. And it made me feel so depressed when he said that. and it was like some post that came on Facebook. I can't remember who wrote it though, but obviously it's just his idea and we don't necessarily have to take that route, you know. But I was thinking of how one could actually in our protests bring in more of those three principles so that as not that we want to sugarcoat the message, but also that we don't make people feel so depressed that they do feel hopeless, you know. I mean, I often think that maybe why people, I mean, I think you guys are in countries where you've got bigger crowds with you, but then we have here, we still got far to go with gathering people, and there's also our political history is also making a difference on people joining us as well. But a lot of people, I think, don't join because they do think it's hopeless. So a way to make people aware of the problems, but also to also bring that aspect of you're not alone and everything is connected, and ideas on how to bring that across actually in the protest.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's not perfect, but I think good enough. And I'm wondering if Erica has something to say about that as an XR person in the UK. Erica, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I would certainly say that, you know, somebody who is suggesting one particular style of action over another is responding to their own feelings, and that it's not, if you like, an official position, because, you know, the thing about XR is it's a movement, it's not an organization. And what that means is that as long as people are sticking to the basic principles of nonviolence and all the rest of it, that people will do what feels right to them, and what feels right will be different for different people in different circumstances, in different countries, in different cultures, and on different days of the week. You know, we will respond as we respond. And for me, the power of the principles is in recognizing that our feelings, our thoughts and feelings just come and go, you know, like the flowing of a river or the flowing of the weather. They come and go, but what we get to see is that behind that, there is this really solid ground of knowing that ultimately that we are all connected, not just with one another, but with the whole of life on the planet. And that what we are nudged to do on a particular day, in a particular moment, is that's kind of our job for that moment, without needing to analyze at great length what the impact might be or what other people might think about it or anything like that. You know, for me, the freedom is just knowing that whatever occurs to me to do from a place of relative quiet and clarity is what I'm there to do for this moment. And it might change tomorrow or next week or next year, but that doesn't matter. It's just about doing what's here in front of me now, and not getting too caught up in what other people may be saying or thinking out of their current state of their thinking. You know, perfectly understandably, you know, what we are facing is unprecedented. We are all having unprecedented levels of thoughts and feelings as a consequence. And that's, you know, that's perfectly normal and natural. And from this perspective, you can see, well, you know, that's what's happening, and people are going to, you know, react in all sorts of weird, wacky, and also very creative and interesting ways. And that doesn't need to deflect any of us from what feels right for us right here and right now, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it made a lot of sense. Thank you. It often feels like there's quite a flow as well, like that it does come. What you need to be doing, I often feel like a deeper like a deeper calling of what it has to be then and there, and sometimes when we're putting together a protest as well, I'm amazed at the flow, at how things will just fit into the place, and it's like a confirmation of this is what you need to be.
Dion, I don't know if we lost you or if you were done. Um, I just wanted to add, Erica, to your beautiful thoughts and explanation, that, you know, from a spiritual perspective too, there can be a resistance to negative emotions just coming from the other side. And I sometimes feel like, you know, a bit of well-placed anger is very effective. You know, it's sometimes it feels theatrical. It's like, this is something to be angry about. I mean, there are a lot of things we burn ourselves out being angry about in our personal lives, but this is something really to be angry about when it comes to, say, ExxonMobil. But I think the piece that, especially for people who are very busy with all of this, being activists or what have you, is that to recognize that being personally in negative emotions over an extended period of time is creates burnout. So there's sometimes what I see are two worlds. From the spiritual world, an overemphasis on always being at peace and always being happy. And then on the activist side, what I see is maybe too much emphasis on being too serious all the time and too, you know, angry and upset, because there's so much to be angry and upset about, that is true. And yet to find that sort of, you know, the balance or the grounding in the midst of sometimes showing these emotions and being okay with them, but also so super important to move into the positive, to look at the positive, you know, to appreciate, even if it's the actions themselves that they're happening, that some people are moving and acting, you know. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I've seen.
It makes sense. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I can't. I haven't figured out how to chat, so I wish I could chat in response with my bad reception. But thank you both, Edith. Sorry, I've forgotten your names, but thank you for yours.
All right. So anyone else, any other thoughts? How does that hit people? Does that resonate, or are there confusions?
I was going to say that I'm just slightly careful about saying about looking at the positive. What my experience is that because when you accept that sometimes you're angry and sometimes you're upset and sometimes you're in grief and so on, that when you're not trying to fix it, you're just with it, just is. That it does flow, it comes and it goes. And then, you know, and then you sort of walk out into the garden and notice the birds in the trees and naturally feel a really deep appreciation for what's there and what's beautiful and so on. And so moving through different kinds of emotions is just naturally what we do. And I think that there is a sort of a positive psychology movement which is about trying to suppress feelings, and that's not what we're talking about. We're simply talking about allowing them to flow, aren't we? We're not, you know, just about not trying to fix anything, just letting it be and letting it go, and allowing it to come and go, and not to have any judgment about how you feel. Because to me, I notice that what causes suffering is not necessarily the feelings themselves, but having the judgment that you ought to be feeling differently. And that's where the difficulties arise. Whereas when you are simply allowing, and if you like, at peace with whatever is going on at the moment, then it just flows more normally and naturally on its way, as it were, without needing anything to be done. You know, there's nothing actively to do about it, because it's not a problem, it's just normal.
So I want to acknowledge what you've just said, Erica, and the truth of that. And the reason I bring up gratitude and positivity, because I know what you're saying, you know, having been teaching for so long and knowing what sort of platitudes are and affirmations and trying to be positive. But the reason I bring up gratitude and positivity now is because, you know, Sydney Banks used to say positivity. He would just say it, you know, and then there was a comment earlier about, well, also gratitude is just a thought, but there's something about the nature of reality. For me, this could just be me, that is actually positive, that is actually love, that is actually gratitude, that mind intelligence. And so it's not that we need to force ourselves to be positive, because that tends to not work, but to remember the importance, I guess, is how I see it, because it's something that's ringing true for me now. When I get on my social media and I'm posting and doing things, there's so much, I think, because you get into an algorithm with Facebook around environmental crises stuff, so you're going to get all of it. You know, and you're going to get it like 3 or 4 times. Everyone knows what's happening in Australia, and oh my God. So, and yet there's something about it's just resonating for me, also looking at the positive. And I'm thinking of just where activists are, where people looking at the crisis are, where there's such a crush of negativity or negative, quote unquote, negative news. So that's all I'm saying. There's something about positivity and gratitude that Sid used to talk about. He used to say, find the feeling of being grateful. And that's not cognitive in terms of changing one's thoughts, but more just, it's almost like an orientation to me, like just orienting. So I'm just adding that, you know, that I've found it in the last even week or so, just to, I don't know, just there's so much happening in the States with Donald Trump, and this sort of feeling of, we have this man in power who is, you know, it's like a dark wingspan over the country. And there's so much news constantly about him. And so just sort of like, okay, you know, and there are all these beautiful people doing beautiful things, you know, really in response to that. And so maybe it's just personal for me. That's been a place for me to look lately. And that, I don't think that actually contradicts anything you're saying either, Erica.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's I mean, absolutely, in the sense of just always knowing that we are part of one system, and that there is this universal intelligence that has got our backs, is what for me holds me grounded, and you could call that positive if you like, and then from that place, then you are, you know, you're naturally grateful for all the, you know, for all the good stuff. And I am, you know, and I am find that, you know, I am increasingly, you know, grateful for just, you know, small things. You know, this afternoon I was cleaning my car, there was a robin in the tree, and I stopped and really appreciated the robin singing. I mean, it's you know, it's really simple stuff like that that I'm just noticing that I'm, you know, doing more and more of. So yeah, I totally get what you mean.
So we've got more time. Anyone else there? Donald, you've been quite quiet, and sometimes it looks like you're about to type in the chat box. I'm just wondering how it's going with you.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just typing notes to the computer here. So it's going all right. I'm just, yeah, just taking it in, and I'm just here, I suppose, yeah.
Okay. And you know, this is being recorded. So you can go back and you can find it. We have a YouTube channel called Light on the Horizon, Fridays for Earth. And I'm behind in posting, and partially because I'm not sure how to edit some things out. I need to get some help with that. But the rest of them are there. And the second webinar that we ever did has the principles again in a very simple presentation. And actually, you might want to go back and listen again without taking any notes, because notes are good, but they can also, sort of distract the listening. So I would just recommend you go back. You can listen to this recording again or any of the other ones that are on the YouTube if you're called to do so. So anyone else, any other thoughts? We don't have to take the whole time. Shannon, you were commenting a lot on the Facebook group, 3 Principles in Climate Crisis, and I'm wondering how you're doing. You're someone who also has been right in the midst of the feeling the crisis, thinking about it, and also right in the midst of being in the 3 Principles world on Salt Spring Island and so forth. Are you there? Oh, sorry, I lost my voice. So that's what you said earlier. I actually lost my voice 3 weeks ago. I'm just slowly getting it back. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because I keep doing stuff like this. Anyone else? Yeah, Andre.
I think you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. Used to me leaving myself unmuted. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I do have a question about how one deals with the climate situation crisis in the context of being a parent. I'm guessing a couple of people on here might be parents already, possibly grandparents. At the moment, I'm kind of following the approach where I don't want to confront my children with more than what they're ready for, so I'm trying to be led by them. And at the same time, I also feel a responsibility to, be truthful and not be hiding truth. And find that a very difficult line to try and find, never mind navigate. Yeah, so that's I suppose the area of question that's most prominent for me at the moment, my own experience.
How many people are parents or grandparents? If for those on video, I have a 13 and a 15-year-old. And this is one of the hardest things that I struggle with or think about too. So far, my approach has been to say, we need to be active now. Things are not looking good. But I haven't gone into, possible human extinction and that kind. And I like what you said about letting them be the lead, because it is troubling, because you don't know, should we be, should they be going to college even, or should they be learning survival skills? So for now, one of the things that I've learned from the principles is just that it's okay to not know until you know. Because until you have that sense of, okay, this is the right thing to do or say, you're in confusion, you're in the unknown, and it's actually really okay to be in that space until you do know. So that's all that I would say. And would anyone else like to chime in? As a parent, Tim, did you say you were a parent too, or Erica? I don't.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, carry on, Tim.
No, after you, Erica. We're British here.
I'm not a parent, but I'm an aunt. The other thing I would say is that is also to sort of kind of not underestimate the resilience of kids and nor underestimate what they already know. Because, with all the things like the school strikes and all the rest of it and everybody following Greta, I think that children can find it quite worrying if they feel that stuff is being hidden from them. So I absolutely agree it's a fine line to tread, but I'm slightly, I think that children are quite tough, they are quite resilient, and many of us here were brought up with the threat of nuclear war hanging over us when we were kids. And we kind of lived with that. And so now this week, most of us feel is really an even greater threat, but we didn't know that at the time. And so whilst obviously you're not going to stuff anything down anybody's throats, but at the same time, I think, again, it's about the sense of us all, of a connection and of us, being in this together, so to speak, and that needing a degree of openness and clarity as best you can, is what sort of feels right to me. So yeah, I loved what you said about sort of just taking the lead from them. I mean, I seek to be kind of responsive. I talk a little bit about what I'm doing and await questions or await feedback. And if it's there, that's great. We'll continue the conversation. If it's not, then fine. I don't push it as I would with anybody, actually. I don't really treat them any different than I probably would anybody else in that respect, but with an extra sort of level of sensitivity to, not wanting to push it, but also wanting to be open.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think being responsive is a good way of putting it, Erica, because for me, as the so-called adults, responsibility is our ability to respond. And so if I'm confronted with anything that unsettles me or I don't know, and then when I'm asked by a young person, especially my daughter, I'll say I don't know, or I will give them the truth as I know it, or my perspective. But you know what? I recognise different little beings will be very different and have different personalities. My daughter's very robust, to the point where we buried her pet rat a couple of days ago. I was, digging the grave very respectfully, and said a few words for our little lost friend who had passed. And I said to Tia, "Do you want to say anything?" She went, "Yeah, bye." And I think she's got a similar approach to some of the things that we see are happening in our world. And there's part of her that believes it's all going to be all right. And I see this in young people, the belief in, they're going to be part of the generation that are creating answers. And I think to a large extent, that is true. I'm not saying we're going to save the planet. I've no idea. Who knows? But certainly with technology and education and activism and changing political climates and all sorts of things, and just the sheer creativity and intelligence of human beings trying to make a better life for themselves seems to be changing an awful lot. And I talked to her recently about because most generations have some kind of end of time fear. Certainly in my generation, I can remember making pacts when I was her age or just a little bit younger, and so about 10 or 11, I made pacts with my friends to meet up in the cornfields just outside of our estate when the nuclear war was going to happen. And most of us of that generation had that fear that the world was going to end and it was all going to be terribly serious. And that conversation with Tia was, well, we're still here. Things have changed now, and so I deal with it with honesty, and as best as I think is fit, what the best to my ability to respond. But I also think a lot of the stuff that we're into and we have on our minds, they just don't. And I think every generation has had some kind of end end of date stuff on their mind and fearful thinking around that. You know, the Second World War, First World War, you name it. You could go back to Middle Ages and the Black Plague, or I don't know, or the Stone Age times and the appearance of the next tribe, or whatever. But I think it's something that we all have going, and I think that's kind of some of the things that you were saying actually when you first started talking, Andre. But that's what I heard when you were talking.
Yeah, if I can share quickly why this kind of question mark arose for me recently, is I've got two 14-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl, very different temperaments and personalities. The boy is this hypersensitive, very, very aware soul. So with him, things come up naturally in conversation, and he's naturally explorative and deals with everything. Whereas my girl is this little hyperactive extrovert and very pain averse or frustration averse. And doesn't talk about stuff really. She wants to be out dancing. And I wasn't sure if she's even climate change aware really. And I was wondering about this. And then the other day we were up on the roof with a friend of hers, and somebody sent me a video over WhatsApp or something that was this like kids singing a song. I think it's called Dear 2045. And I immediately saw there was a climate change video, so I stopped it from playing as it started playing on my phone within the first bar of music. But with just the first few notes having rung out from my phone, my girl and her friend started singing the rest of the song, word for word, which then was quite a revelation to me that they are, definitely very climate change aware. And a little while later, I asked them, so, given that song and everything, how do you guys feel about it? Which they thought a little bit about and then said to me, yeah, it's kind of okay. Maybe the aliens will come and save us. Which, raises a whole lot of things in terms of where they're at and what they're saying about their faith in humanity. But that's what raises the question for me is and I like what you're saying about responsibility. So yeah, I think I've gotten what I'm asking for out of all of that. Not sure why I wanted to add that on.
Well, one thing that Tim has reminded me is of our, just to have any kind of a pat answer for anyone about how to talk to your kids about climate change would be a formula. And yet for each of us, this is the distinction between conditioned thinking or thinking from the past or a formula versus our own organic, responsiveness and our own that intelligence flowing through each of us. And that was one of the most
That's truth.
Yeah, that was one of the most profound things I ever learned when I was first learning these principles to be a teacher. I was going through, I think, buying a house, and the house needed all kinds of work, and the mortgage process, everything was just kind of like so complex. And then I learned in the principles, just you can do what feels right to you. Like you can just do what feels right to you, and not all these experts and people with all these ideas. And that was a huge revelation for me. Like, I could just to be able to trust something about myself, that was going to be responsive and that would feel right. And this is where feelings can come into play, is it's based on that feeling. Does this feel right? Like yesterday when I went away from my house and I went to the beach, that all felt like the right thing to do. And then I came home and I shared with my family some things that had been upsetting me that had been going on for a bit, and that felt right. And then there was another moment at which I was talking to my daughter, and she was in bed, and I wanted her to get off her phone and read a book and that kind of thing. And I was telling her this, and it didn't feel right. It felt like an idea I had as a mom about how things should look, you know, and so there is a sense of being guided more by the intuitive and by the feeling of things rather than, you know, the imposition or superimposition of what people tell us we should be doing, what people tell us we should be saying. Even the climate crisis, we should be in a panic. Is that true? So it's really, there's an incredible, radical, revolutionary freedom to not having to pick up any thought about anything. And it's something that just from my own personal experience in being an activist again, because I was a big activist in college, that there are formulas of thought that float around activist communities, as well as in spiritual communities, and as well as in the Three Principles community, that people just naturally buy into because it's part of the group thing. And, you know, I think there's some kind of survival mechanism in us. I need to belong to the group, you know, I don't want to be shunned from the group. And yet I think that can get in the way of the truth of perhaps what's happening and maybe what needs to be done. Like I've been thinking about this sort of like billionaires are these evil, you know, people who are destroying the planet. And yes, that's probably true. On some level it is true. But I'm sure there are some who are very concerned. You know what I'm saying? Like we can't, it's like as soon as we have a formula about a group or people, I think we're disconnecting from what's real. And I think we have to be careful about that in activism. That's my sense, because we may want to target ExxonMobil, but if someone from ExxonMobil is starting to have a shift, will we catch that? Will we see it? Will we be able to recruit them to be helpful? You know, that kind of thing. That's just one example. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the idea of being in the unknown and letting go of all formulas and prescriptions and past ways of being an activist, past ways of being a spiritual person, past ways of being a Three Principles person, and constantly coming back into the now, the now, the now, the now, the now. What's fresh? What's truth now, which will be different from yesterday. Yes, Amy, and each child and young person has their own innate resilience already built in. Do what you think is best because we have inbuilt resilience and wisdom within. That sounds good. Yeah, as a mom, I can worry and forget that my kids have that resilience and wisdom inside of them and the capacity for their own truth. So are there any final thoughts? Because we're at 11:29 and we usually go for an hour and a half. Any last comments or thoughts? Okay, super cool. So the next, my dog, Coco, our next webinar will be the last Friday of January, same time, with Linda Sandell-Pettit, who has traveled the globe sharing and teaching the principles, also has a very intuitive, a deep intuitiveness about her. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. And the topic she came up with was Beyond Grief, Eternal Love. So we'll see what that's about. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm so grateful for everyone. This is like a dream come true to have climate activists and Three Principles people together. Is like, really, it is my dream come true. So I really thank everyone for being here. And for people who are new, it is all a bit abstract. And I just would encourage you to maybe look at some of the recordings or come back for another session, or because it takes time. It's funny. It's like before the penny drops sometimes. It's like, what is all this? It sounds like old stuff, or it sounds like you can't get your mind around it. And sometimes it just takes a little time. So yeah, are we good? All right. Thank you so much. See you hopefully in January.
Thanks, Amy.
Ciao.
For your help. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.